Let's now go over the common data types in Python. If you've already done the part of this course for JavaScript, then this will pretty much just be revision for you. The main different types we have are numbers, strings, which are pretty much just text. We have lists, which in JavaScript we called arrays. So just to be difficult, they decided to call it something different. And then also we have dictionaries, which we were calling objects in JavaScript. And then also we have what we haven't come across before, which are tuples and sets, which we'll go over. So let's start off with numbers. Now I'm just going to add a new cell below this, and the way I do that is because I've selected outside of the cell, press B, we have a new cell. I press enter to get started. So let's start with numbers. So with numbers we have two different types of numbers. I'm going to create a comment here, which I'll be going over in a future lecture. But it basically means that I can run this code and this will be ignored. So we're going to focus on two of the main types of numbers. You get integers and floats. So integers are pretty much just whole numbers. So any number you can think of, let's say 908, that's an integer. A float is any with decimal points. So let's say 1.453798 or whatever, or even if it's just 1.4. That's the difference. We have integers and we have floats. So let's have a few examples here, and let's store them in variables. So let's go for integer 1 with an underscore. Let's say it's 908. Then with a float, let's call this float underscore 1 equals 9.6. Now what we can do that's quite cool in Python is if we type in type, so type, and then in brackets we put in one of these variables, it will actually tell us what type it is. So it's saying that int1 is an integer, and just to show you that this isn't using the name of the variable or anything like that, let's change it to number1. You'll see it still comes out. Oh, I need to run this cell first. There we go. It still comes out the same. So let's go for float underscore 1. So there we go. Comes out as float. Fantastic. So we'll keep this here and we can keep trying it out. So the next thing I'm going to show you are strings. So strings is basically just text. So whether you use double quotations or single, it doesn't really matter. So I'm going to write, hi, my name is John. So let's store that as a variable. I'm just going to call it my text. So now if we look at the type, you can see that it's now str, which stands for string. So far we've gone over the two numbers, which are integers and floats. Integers are whole numbers, floats are ones with decimal points. And then we've gone over strings, which is just text. So the next thing we'll go over are lists. So in JavaScript we call these arrays. So I'm just going to call this one a list. So what we do here is we use the square brackets, and then we can put in as many different elements as we like. So you can put in numbers, you can put in strings, you can put in floats, you can even put in another list. So you can put lists within a list. So essentially the important thing about lists is that it stores data and it stores it in order. So this is always going to be the first object in the list. This is going to be the second one, third, fourth, and fifth. So that's really important for lists. They're kept in a specific order. So if we look at the type of a underscore list, you'll see that it says it's a list. So it's happy to have lists within lists. We could even have lists within lists within lists, which is fun. And we'll get onto lists in a lot more detail in the future, but all you need to know for now is that it stores data of different types. And that's all you really need to know. So next up we have dictionaries. So dictionaries, if I do my underscore dict, and then we use curly brackets. And for this we have key value pairs. So we could actually have, for example, like the names and heights of people. So let's go for meters. So 2 meters, and then we separate it with commas. Bill. So Bill's very tall. Then Hank. 1 meter. So those are the numbers, strings, lists, and dictionaries. I'm going to leave tuples and sets for another time because I want us just to focus on some of the main ones that we're going to be using. Tuples and sets are still used, but definitely not as much as we use the other ones. So in this lecture, so far we've gone over the different types of numbers. So the main types are integers and floats. Then we went over strings, which is text. Then lists, which store data, whether it's numbers, strings, lists, anything like that. It stores them, and it stores them in a specific order. So you have a first object and a second, and so on. Then finally we looked at dictionaries, and in dictionaries you have key value pairs where you can refer to John, for example, and it will give you the height that's combined with it. So the final thing that I want to go into is that you can sometimes add things together, and you can also convert things. So for example, we can add numbers together, right? That's nothing special. So we could add an integer to a float and we get the result. What if we had two strings? I'm just going to call it A and B. So we have two strings. Now what we can actually do is we could print off A plus B. So we can add the two strings together. One thing that we can't do is do print off a string and a number. We're going to get an error. Concatenate you can think of as being the same thing as add. So it's basically saying you can't add together a string, can't concatenate string, not integer. You can only concatenate strings, not integers. So you can add numbers together, you can add strings together, but you can't add a number to a string. There's one thing that we can do, and that's we can actually convert numbers into strings. All we have to do for that is put string, str, and then the number, 7. So let's just make sure that works. Let's say my number equals 7. My string equals hi. So if we try and add these together, I think you know what's going to happen. It's going to give us some kind of error saying we're not allowed to add those two together basically. But if we were to convert this number into a string by doing str and then having that in brackets, then it's able to add 7 to hi because it thinks it's actually a string just saying 7. So that's fine. So that's all we're going to go over in this lecture. We've gone over numbers, and so what I suggest you do is write each one of these out yourself. So we've got numbers, they can be integers or floats, we have strings, we have lists, we have dictionaries, and we'll go over the other ones in another time. We can add together numbers, we can also add together strings, but we can't add numbers to strings unless we're able to convert a number to a string, or a string, for example, let's say we write 89 as a string, then we can convert that to a number by doing integer, int. Oh, we need to run this one first. There we go. So we've gone over quite a lot today. So what I recommend you do is definitely have a play with it. Try and create your own numbers, so integers and floats, your own strings. If you're feeling courageous, you could go on to doing lists and dictionaries as well, and you can always check what type they are by putting type, and then you can put the variable or the actual value in the brackets. And then try to see if you can add together some strings and some numbers. You'll undoubtedly come across a few errors as you go along, but just keep going, and then I'll see you in the next lecture.